This is Fresh Tracks Weekly. This week we are discussing potential conflicts of interest within Fish and Wildlife Commissions and how certain individuals could directly benefit from their votes as a commissioner. But before that, we have a few news items to touch on. In Montana, the statewide mule deer permit was recently raffled off by Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, raising a record amount of money for mule deer conservation. This is a significant change from past years when that same statewide permit was auctioned off with a record of $41,000. Many western states offer a handful of statewide permits for each big game animal to raise funds for species-specific conservation. Montana has several for each species, usually with one going to auction and the other one going to a state-run raffle. But Montana BHA wanted to try something different with that tag that usually goes to auction, and they made the case to the FWP Commission to raffle off the permit instead of auctioning it in an effort to make it a more equitable allocation. Basically, instead of whatever individual had the deepest pockets, almost everyone would have a chance by purchasing a $20 raffle ticket. Individuals could still stack the odds in their favor if they wanted to purchase a ton of tickets, as there was no maximum purchase, but at least everyone would still have a chance. Montana BHA did indeed succeed in their efforts, raising $56,620, significantly beating the previous record. Also, the winner of the hunt had only purchased 5 tickets for $100. In a previous episode, we talked about how Arizona is going to end their statewide auction tags, and many people have questioned how they plan on replacing the funding. Some groups are hopeful that a raffle over the auction could be the answer, at least for some species. The main concern comes from the high-value permits such as bighorn sheep, or in certain states where the mule deer auction permits go for over $500,000. So there's question as to whether the raffle system can compete with the auction system in those high-dollar cases such as that. But we mentioned it in that previous episode, and I'll mention it again, neither auctions nor raffles are the only way to maintain funding for wildlife. We could also simply raise the price for licenses and tags. Ultimately, it'll be up to each state and their stakeholders on what they are willing to stomach for funding their wildlife. Last December, the Duck Stamp Modernization Act was signed into law, which will allow for federal duck stamps to be purchased online, and an e-stamp will be valid through the entire season. For the last few years, you have been able to purchase duck stamps online, but that digital copy was only valid for 45 days while the physical stamp was being shipped. This new law simply allows for that digital or e-stamp to be valid for the entire season. They will still produce and mail out physical stamps to keep that art contest part of the legacy alive, but you no longer have to retain the physical stamp in the field to be legal. Montana adopted a similar idea this year where you just need to have purchased the Montana Migratory Bird License, but you still receive a big collectible sticker. Kind of cool, I guess. Now I have some cool stamps to decorate my water bottle instead of getting all torn apart in my wallet. In Tennessee, the Wildlife Resources Agency recently lost its appeal over a previous decision that had ended the use of the open fields doctrine within the state. We talked about this in a previous episode where 2 landowners sued Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency for ignoring no trespassing signs on their property and installing cameras on that private property. The agency argued that under the open fields doctrine that they could legally place the cameras, while the landowner argued that they violated the Fourth Amendment. The landowners won that case. The basic premise of the open fields doctrine is that wildlife are public resources and that a game warden can inspect individuals engaging in hunting, fishing, or trapping without having to have permission to enter the private property where those activities are occurring. This is common practice across multiple states, but several states have been adopting laws that change or overrule the use of the open fields doctrine. The Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency has 60 days to appeal the case to the state Supreme Court. A new study published by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention suggests that chronic wasting disease is very unlikely to transfer from other species to humans. A few weeks back, news broke of 2 hunters dying from a neurological disease, and those hunters had eaten deer meat from a population known to have CWD. Many news outlets ran with those articles, strongly implying that the hunters died from a zombie deer disease, while the actual scientists tried to slow everyone down and state that there was still no evidence that transmission occurred. That's what makes this new CDC study very timely, as people have been getting all fired up from potentially dying from the zombie deer disease. Previous studies have done experiments using primates where they attempted to infect them with CWD and found that it is possible to transmit the disease to squirrel monkeys, but it was not transmitted to macaques, which more closely resemble humans. This new study takes it a step further by utilizing technology that even more closely reflects humans by using artificially grown tissue that mimics human brain tissue. and they exposed it to CWD prions from different sources, basically trying everything they could to get CWD to infect that tissue. But no such luck. CWD never propagated in the artificial tissue. This suggests a strong species barrier, and the likelihood of the disease transferring from deer to humans is low. In Washington, the Fish and Wildlife Commission voted to change their mountain lion hunting regulations in season, leaving less opportunity for hunters. The department is accepting public comment on the matter until June 21st. The proposed changes would include cutting the season by a month, lowering the percent of allowed harvest in each unit down to 13% of that total population, along with including all known mountain lion deaths in the total allowed harvest, which would include things like roadkill and conflict lions that are put down. The changes were a result of a petition that was submitted by animal welfare groups to the commission that raised concerns of overharvesting lions within the state. Howl for Wildlife has put out an action alert telling individuals to submit public comment to the commission to reconsider these changes. Howl for Wildlife noted that they would like to see the commission listen to and utilize the data that their own department has collected rather than looking at cherry-picked theories from biased sources. Anyway, if you live in Washington and want to comment on this, you have until June 21st to do so. I'll put a few links in the video description. Speaking of commissions, that's what we're talking about in today's deeper dive: individuals on commissions and conflicts of interest. Figured we could talk about conflicts of interest with particular, in particular, game and fish commissions, because you tend to see some commissioners that get appointed to whatever, Fish and Wildlife Commission that could have conflicts of interest with whatever it is that maybe their own industry, their own lives, that the things that they're voting on could directly benefit them, when in theory they should be, voting on what benefits all the stakeholders, all their beneficiaries.
All the beneficiaries and the trust resource, i.e. the wildlife.
Right.
Yeah, that's called conflict of interest. And there's two types of conflict of interest. Conflict in fact, in other words, you truly are conflicted, or conflict in appearance, which to the outsider, they're going to think you're conflicted. Whether you're the most honest, straightforward person in the world, the mere appearance of a conflict is deemed to be a conflict.
Yeah. So I don't know if we want to just dive into examples or just speak in broad terms, but we have examples in both Montana and New Mexico that are,
very obvious.
Seemingly, right.
Right.
To me, it seems like a red flag, and I don't know. Maybe it's not as big of a deal as I think, but
yeah. Before we jump into those two examples, I want to use my own example.
Okay.
So I've been asked to serve on the Montana Fish and Game Commission, or at least throw my hat in there for consideration multiple times. Mm-hmm. But there's no way I could do it without being in a conflict of interest, either in fact or in appearance. Let's say I could be like the straightest arrow, not influenced by anything. Do you think when there's a vote about certain tags or quotas or season structures, that us being in this business isn't going to cause people to say, did Newberg vote that way because he's got this business that we film hunting content?
Right. Well, and I guess you could directly go to that because, Jana Waller was a commissioner who's no longer a commissioner, but she would have had a similar conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest. Right. And I can't think of a specific example necessarily, but
I can't either for Jana.
No, yeah, I'm saying so these things arise frequently, I guess.
Right. And so, like I said, even if I was the straightest shooter, no one could influence me under any way. The fact that there's the appearance out there that Newberg's voting this way because Marcus is going to get a tag and they can go film it. You think people wouldn't have that in their mind?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So my mere appearance of a conflict represents a conflict of interest. And therefore, as long as I'm involved in this business, I'm never going to serve on a Fish and Game Commission because I'm going to be conflicted in appearance, if not in fact.
Yeah. So is anybody responsible for checking to see if there's conflict of interest? Is there, who's the authority who's going to go yes, this is a conflict versus this isn't a conflict?
Right. So if you ever go and hire an attorney or an accounting firm or some other firm, they're going to run what's called the conflict check. In other words, do we have any clients, any relationships that conflict with taking you as a client?
Right.
So this whole idea of conflict of interest is the norm in the business world. We deal with it all the time. We're like, oh, sorry, can't take that because it'd appear I have a conflict. Mm-hmm. Well, in these public trustee wildlife worlds, I've never heard or seen a conflict check be done.
Gotcha.
So we observe that politics is really influencing wildlife decisions. Why? Because we have governors who appoint. If we kind of agree that the commissions are some of our most important trustees of the public trust of wildlife, which I think most people would. There's the legislature and the governor also, but these people are the ones meeting monthly on this issue or however frequently with the department. Mm-hmm. So they are every case out there says they're trustees. Well, if governors are appointing them and not giving any concern to what their background is, what their affiliations are, what their line of work is, you're going to end up with some of them who probably come from backgrounds that would be just as conflicted or more conflicted as I would be if I was on the commission.
Right. And I feel like, at least in a few of the meetings that I've watched, it's almost like self-regulating. I have seen people recuse themselves of certain votes for certain reasons.
Right.
So
seldom, but yeah.
Like, so that will happen occasionally, but it's just like, yeah, to just have self-regulation seems,
right.
I don't know, it's kind of strange.
So let's use, I don't know where we want to start. Maybe we could do, we had a former commissioner from Montana, Dan Vermillion, very good guy. I thought he was a great commissioner.
Yeah.
But he's involved in the fly fishing business.
Right.
I bet you any time a fly fishing issue or a fishing issue came up to the commission, a lot of people are like, is he going to recuse himself? What's he going to do here?
Right.
And so he's probably wide open to vote on anything other than fishing. But when it came to fishing, he probably had to think about, what's this going to look like to the public?
Yeah. And it's hard too, because then like also, obviously he probably got on the commission because he's passionate about the fishery, fisheries resources in Montana. And so it's like, he's also, passionate, probably knowledgeable on certain issues. And so it's like, but to make sure that you're making a decision that's in the best interest of all the stakeholders, that's, right. I don't know. It's just a tough one.
Right. And so if I was at the time advising Commissioner Vermillion, we have a commissioner who was president at one time was president of the Montana Outfitters and Guides Association.
Right.
For either of them, if I was advising them, I'd say, hey, on this issue, you probably shouldn't be voting. You shouldn't even submit that.
Right.
You shouldn't propose that amendment or that idea because it really comes with a ton of conflict of interest.
Yeah. And so, I mean, do we want to go down that rabbit hole of like,
sure.
So, yeah.
Because I was a big pain in the butt on one of them. So we had one a couple of years ago. It was in December where that commissioner, who is an outfitter,
right,
submitted a proposal to change some boundaries and get rid of the limited entry draw in a unit where the bull to cow ratios are ridiculously low. So it's not even his region. He comes to our region, Region 3, which there's kind of been this thing of, hey, I'll make the introductions of bills from my region. You make them from your. Let's not get in each other's mess kit here. Well, there were a lot of complaints from outfitters that, hey, now that it's on a limited entry draw, our clients are only getting 10% because non-residents are limited to 10%. So he wanted to get rid of that. Is that so? Him coming and being the former president of MOGA, Montana Outfitter and Guide Association, even if this was pure intention and just wanting more harvest of the resource, thought the resource could sustain it.
Right.
Is there very many reasonable people who are going to look at those facts and say, oh, he's not conflicted?
Right. And so I think, because then it becomes a question of like, well, I feel like even he would probably say like, well, I'm acting on behalf of outfitters and guides in Montana who are one of the stakeholders of the state. And but I'm trying to make a decision that's going to benefit them, but then it could be negatively
to the
detriment
of the others. So that's the whole idea of trusteeship, right? If you're a trustee, it's impartiality. You have to treat all beneficiaries equally. And this is where some of these state statutes kind of screw us up, because there are some state statutes that say, all right, we need a commissioner from this industry and one from this industry and one from that industry. And I think it's good that we have a cross-section of people.
Yeah.
But when you start saying they got to come from that industry, they come forward and they feel like they got to be an advocate for that industry, which when they advocate for that industry, they're advocating usually against the rest of the beneficiaries. And under trustee law, you can't pick and choose which beneficiaries you're going to favor.
Yeah.
And there's times when you're trying to advocate for that position or wherever you've been selected from, where that may not be best for the resource either, which is the asset of the trust.
Yeah.
So,
well, so that's like the current one that I've been trying to dig into and trying to understand. This issue is Montana recently went to a statewide June 15th closure for our black bear season.
right.
Before this season, it was like, I'm not sure if it was exactly half, but a lot of the units closed on May 31st. And the main reason for that is as it get later into the season, more females, more sows start coming out and harvest increases from sows, which in turn can, more rapidly decline the bear population.
Yep.
So anyway, I had to go back in time through commission meetings and figure out exactly how this all went down. But it initially started in 2021. There was a proposal to have a statewide June 15th closure, but that got tabled. That did not go through at that time, and then it snowballed and eventually finally went through last year. So this was the first season that we've had that statewide June closure.
Right, June 15th.
Sorry, June 15th closure. Yep. So the thing that's interesting now is there was a piece that got put into that closure that specified that if the female harvest is greater than 37%.
Right, which is that number where they say.
Right, and that's based, the 37% is based off of previous studies, some of them done in Northwest Montana, where if you go above that, you're going to start seeing population declines.
Right.
And so
if the sow harvest is more than 30% of the total harvest, you're going to see declines in the overall bear population.
So anyway, with that, they had that input, and so kind of at the last minute, they threw in the addition of if there's 37% or more by May 31st, then it can be closed. It doesn't say it has to be closed. It's subject to closure.
Right.
If it is over that 37%. Right. So anyway, there's several units that we're right at that right now. That's
and so tomorrow, May 31st.
The day that this is released, we will find out what's going to happen if these units are going to close or not.
Right.
We're not sure. But then it's interesting for all of Region 1, there's one unit that is not subject to that closure. Yeah. Which is currently sitting at 50% female harvest. So you can see the data is publicly posted online.
Right. And when you look today, you showed it to me. That unit is 50% females right now.
50% females.
But it's exempt from this 37% rule.
Because it already had a June 15th closure.
Right.
So that unit for the last 2 years, or since the 2022 season, has had a June 15th closure, and part of the language in that commission meeting, basically nothing that already had the June 15th closure was going to be subject to that 37% rule.
Right.
So regardless, it's not in there, and so I was trying to figure out how this all went down, and I completely forgot. It all stemmed back to that 2021 meeting where they initially proposed the statewide June 15th closure. Didn't happen, but there was one line in the total bear master list where there was all sorts of changes. This is the same time that we changed for hunting with elk deer, but even just within bears, it was when we went to hunting with hounds being allowed. And so there was all sorts of discussion about hunting with hounds, and there was all this stuff related to the changing of reporting, because it used to be mandatory reporting. Right. Region 1 was going to go to a pilot study of self-reporting bears, and so there's all this discussion. And eventually, that discussion happened. They voted, they passed it, and nobody ever discussed the one-line change that moved Unit 130 to being a June 15th closure.
Right.
And so how that got there is where I'm rolling back to is like, was there a conflict of interest there?
Right, because
and I don't know for sure.
We don't know, but here's the appearance again.
Yeah,
so
it's appearance.
It raises these questions, and whether this was by accident, by circumstance, or on purpose, we don't know.
Yeah,
it gives the appearance. It opens the question that this commissioner who outfits up in that area, or he did, I think now his family has kind of taken over. Mm-hmm. It gives the appearance that maybe that was done for the benefit of his business. And I'm not saying it is.
Right.
But that's where we get in this conflict of appearance, or appearance of a conflict is a conflict in fact.
Yeah, I mean, it's awfully suspicious that the only unit in all of Region 1 that is not subject to that closure is the same unit that commissioner has an outfitting operation.
Right.
That's where it really
in that instance,
boils down. Like,
if you are that person that's a trustee, you should recuse yourself. You should not vote. You should abstain. You shouldn't even introduce stuff like that. And I don't even know what the vote was.
Well, he didn't introduce the initial, I don't know about the initial one, but the statewide closure was Region 5 commissioner. It wasn't.
Okay.
But anyway, I don't know. It smells.
But here's the problem with that. When you start using political process of who gets appointed, and you say, well, I got to get this person from this industry and this person from this industry, you bring forth the possibility of all these conflicts. Mm-hmm. And the granddaddy of them all right now is in New Mexico.
So, yeah, I'm really curious about this. So I was trying to research this, and I couldn't find anything. Yes. So I'm relying on you to lay it out.
You know, I stayed, you guys see me here in the morning, right? I'm here reading news wires for an hour or so every morning, trying to stay in touch with all these states. But I think we've used Montana as an example. I'm an example of how conflicted I would be. A past commissioner who, even though I think he tried his best, there's still the appearance of, well, if it's a fisheries issue, and then we've got an outfitter on a commission, everyone's going to say, is this just to help the outfitting buddies or his own business? Even if it's not, and hopefully it's not.
Right.
It's the appearance, right? But New Mexico. So I know New Mexico's had all kinds of change in its commission, but I pulled up the New Mexico Game and Fish website because New Mexico is known to be one of these states where concern about transparency and trustee duties kind of is like, well, maybe, it's like an optional thing. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but anyhow. So I look at their newly appointed commission chairman, not just the commissioner, but the chairman. And I'm reading his description or his bio. It says, is a lifelong New Mexican whose family has deep roots in the state. He's an avid hunter, fisher, and conservationist. He's been a guide for more than 40 years and currently serves as the hunting director at Trout Stalker Ranch in Chama.
Okay.
So, hunting director, he runs a commercial hunting operation. Mm-hmm. Okay. There's a lot of those in New Mexico. There's nothing wrong with running that.
Right.
But every time an agenda item comes before that commission, the chairman in most places get to decide on the agenda. So do you think someone who's got a commercial interest in fee hunting in New Mexico is going to be completely unbiased in what gets put on the agenda? Maybe, hopefully. But do you think there's questions about whether or not that's the case? Yeah. And then I get to reading, this Trout Stalker Ranch in Chama. Where do I hear that name before? I've heard that name before. So I do a quick Google search. And the first thing that comes up is those of you who followed, I think it was in 22, New Mexico Wildlife Federation, New Mexico Backcountry Hunters and Anglers joined in a lawsuit that was started by the Adobe Whitewater Club of New Mexico to allow the public to use their streams.
Yeah.
Okay, they sued the commission and said, hey, you have to enforce this law because it's stated under New Mexico law that we have public access to our streams, and the commission wouldn't do anything. So they had to sue. Who is the first listed intervener? Chama Trout Stalkers LLC. So I'm like, wait a second. So I go do the New Mexico Secretary of State website search to make sure I'm on board. I got the same groups and people and everything. So even if this new chairperson is like the straightest arrow, never influenced by anything, only equally concerned about every public trustee when making decisions, do you think the fact that he's the hunting director on a property that's sued to keep the public away from public streams, do you think that doesn't give the appearance that there could be some conflicts, both in what ends up on the agenda, what gets voted on?
Yeah, I mean,
this is, we're using this for illustration,
right?
Okay, we're not saying that these people are conflicted. We're saying when you put yourself in that position, you give the appearance of conflict, and we hope that you aren't conflicted. But a reasonable person would have to look and say, hey, is that guy really voting in our interest, or is he influenced slightly by something else? And I can't say if he is. I don't know. I haven't seen his votes. But the mere fact that you'd be the hunting director on a property that was the very first listed intervener on a lawsuit to keep the public off the rivers and streams, that's not very good. And then you say you're a commercial hunting a director of a commercial hunting operation. Maybe. The risk of this is we're saying things that aren't true. These are just straight arrow people. They would never be influenced by anything. You hope that's the case.
Right. But I don't think anybody's perfect. Like, as hard as you try, like, you're going to be influenced. Yeah, you're going to be influenced by stuff, and it's going to be hard for anybody, but it's just like,
right.
I guess one big question I would have is, I mean, it boils back to that first question. It's like, whose responsibility is it to hold these people accountable to make sure that there's no blatant conflicts of interest?
We the beneficiaries.
Right. So I was basically going to say, like, so when people smell this BS, they just need to call it out, I guess.
Right. Call it out and say, you should recuse yourself.
Yeah.
No, if someone else wants to introduce that amendment, okay, but this appears as a conflict of interest. And you would hope that commissions would hold themselves to that. And I like you said, I've seen commissioners say, hey, I'm a landowner, I'm involved in this, I don't think I should vote on this. And they've recused themselves. I've seen it happen.
Right.
But let's say you're a chairperson and you get to set the agenda of what gets heard, of what gets voted on, and what the public gets to discuss.
Right.
Can you recuse yourself from everything?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. And so, I mean, if you do see something like this, like, so let's say that there's an agenda that pops up and like, okay, this commission meeting is going to happen, next week. And then you see this agenda, it's like, that looks like it's going to be a conflict of interest. Is there, do you think, what would be like the proper steps to take at that point to like, hey, is this an issue? Can we like head this off and address it? I mean, I don't know.
The first thing you'd want to do is notify that commissioner or that trustee, and maybe it's a legislator. Hey, you're conflicted here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope you're going to recuse yourself. I hope you're not going to vote. And if they're like, no, who are you? I know what I'm doing here.
What if it was their proposal?
Well, then you should say you shouldn't even be you introducing this. The mere fact you've introduced this is a conflict.
Gotcha.
So if you see it, what you should do is get a hold of the chairperson and say, chairperson, this amendment, this agenda item submitted by that commissioner represents a conflict of interest. You should not allow it unless introduced by a different commissioner.
Gotcha.
And see what happens. Now, okay, let's say you do all this stuff and nothing happens. They're like, we don't need to listen to these people. We're the commission. Well, under trustee law, the only recourse is the courts.
Gotcha. So if it boiled down to it, something big, you could, yeah.
I feel bad picking on this guy in New Mexico. I don't know him. He might be like the nicest guy in the world, right? But if I lived in New Mexico, there's a very good chance I'd be lawyered up. You know that how much money I spend on attorneys vetting all these things and all the stuff we do. I would probably go and have a discussion and say, I'd hate to have to lawyer up here, but you're going to have to recuse yourself from an awful lot of votes, or we're going to be in court. And
gotcha.
They'd say, well, fine, see you in court. You want to spend that much money, knock yourself out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the whole part of this comes back to proper governance, right? Selecting trustees who represent the interests of the vast array of beneficiaries you have in that state, but make sure they're qualified and non-conflicted. There's a ton of non-conflicted qualified trustees out there.
Yeah, but a lot of these commissions, the vast majority are governor appointed.
Governor appointed, most of them.
And so that's like, obviously politics plays a role into that, and you're going to sway into certain user groups that the governor it approves of or is wanting to repay favors or whatever it might be. Who knows? But that's the tough game that you play with this stuff. But.
So anyhow, the whole idea of this is about conflict of interest among trustees, right? And our commissioners are trustees. And I bet you if we went to every state, we probably could find a commissioner listed on their website, like I picked on New Mexico. We grabbed the ones off Montana. We used my own example. We could probably find conflicts everywhere because governors and this appointment process has really been unattentive to the concept of conflicts of interest. And when you say to the victor go the spoils in this political game, we never used to allow that in the wildlife space. Now it's like, well, we give the victor the appointments and the political favors for everything else. Hell with it, let's do it for wildlife too. And so it's really going to come down to us as the beneficiaries. Are we going to hold these trustees to the standards of impartiality? No conflict of interest. Equal treatment of all beneficiaries. No self-serving. All the things that every state statute has about what are the duties a fiduciary, i.e. a trustee, is held to. And are we as the beneficiaries going to force that?
Yeah. Well, good thoughts to ponder, to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Randy.
Yeah. Hopefully give people something to think about.
For sure.
And like I said, we use these as examples because these are situations that just by appearance give the rise to the question. Is this person really looking out for all of us or their buddies?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they're doing it one way or the other. I'm just saying when you put yourself in that situation, you bring forth the doubt. You violated that very first trustee rule of impartiality and conflicts of interest being absent, whether in appearance or in fact. So, thanks for asking me.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for giving us your thoughts on all this.
Wonder how many emails you'll get on this one. Email Marcus.